Thanks, Anis. I think what we'll do now is that we'll open it up for some questions from the audience and then give Arjun a chance to respond at the end. So, Jerry.
And it goes to four. So I'm going to do four. Getting feedback, why? It's yours. No. I'm not going to comment on all of the papers, but I'd like to comment on this one. I find it exciting because I think you're trying to do the same thing starting from Hegel that I'm trying to do starting from Bentham. So, and in my work, as you'll see later, is I'm trying to model convention shift and norm shift, which you're trying to do as well. And I do so using simple game theory, inspired by Thomas Schelling and David Lewis, who is a philosopher of language, about social convention, modeling with these analytic methods. And these methods, I think, have, well, in my usage, I think I can say they have strong explanatory and predictive power and even operational usefulness. And I'll wait for the whole story for my own presentation, but I did want to say something about singing and dancing, which I think is deliberation. And I would, if I had said this 10 years ago, I think I would have dropped dead, because I'm a really rational guy. But there's an intrinsic, people coordinate because it's in their interest, like coordinating and speaking a language. But I think also, not always, but there can be an intrinsic value to coordination. It's pleasant to have a nice coordinated conversation with someone. And W.H. McNeill, the world historian, wrote this book after he was retired called Keeping Together in Time. And what was it about? He said the most enjoyable thing that he'd ever done in his life is when he was drafted and he did military drills and training. And nothing in his life he'd ever enjoyed so much. So he was writing about singing, dancing. Well, there's something about us where this intrinsic pleasure of coordination. And you can use that to start a meeting and to finish a meeting. And you could even test this in, say like in a social dilemma laboratory experiment. You could have one condition where people have pleasurable coordination before the social dilemma play and one without. So those are my brief comments on your quite fascinating and pleasurable work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Any other comments? Archon and then Promita.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the conditions of felicity and some of the, the work that that Bijou talked about earlier that has a more favorable view about deliberation and its potential for benefiting development. Does cherry pick a lot of examples, right? I mean, Porto Alegre is not everywhere, and then. So then you've got to think about, well, what are the conditions of felicity and how special are they? And a couple of different kind of categories that occurred to my mind. Usually this kind of state positive disposition is an important condition of felicity, right? So the state in Porto Alegre and in Kerala, in other places, is behind, at least partially, some kind of empowered deliberation or empowered participation, and that explains why the performative acts meet with some success. So that's one category that I think is relatively well understood, or at least its importance is well understood. Another one, however, when I was kind of listening to the paper and then some of the comments, is that there might be a different path in which felicity comes from the right kinds of underlying social conditions, whether or not the state is favorable. And so here I'm thinking of the MKSS in Rajasthan, and I think probably most people in the room, or many of them, know about that example, in which of the local state in Rajasthan is definitely not favorable to these performative acts, right? But what the right to information at the local level and the struggle for local information does is set the stage in which accountability and promises can be exchanged, and the performance of at least the people who are claiming is much, much more likely to be successful because of the kind of epistemic condition of information, but also the social condition of people being mobilized to pay attention to this information, right? So that's a very, very different path from a favorably disposed state.
Paramita and then Giampaolo.
Was also actually about singing and dancing. So I feel like you had two separate elements in your paper. One is the performative element, but there's also the performance element of singing and dancing. And I totally agree with you that it's very effective in doing what it does. It's sort of try to establish a reciprocal relationship vis-a-vis power holders. But then I'm thinking, to borrow sort of, Anne Swidler's term of, if you think of a toolkit or repertoire of deliberative techniques, by overstating the importance or effectiveness of singing and dancing for a certain class of, people, sort of subaltern groups, are we not also with the same move restricting them to certain particular kinds or types of deliberation and de-emphasizing the importance of new types of, deliberative capacity building? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Giampaolo?
I appreciated very much your paper. I like a lot the idea of doing away with context. Context is a big, ugly word. Bruno Latour says it stinks. But I wanted to ask you, Roberto Unger says we must do context smashing. So I think I like that a lot, and I like a lot the idea of previous failures remaining as a kind of legacy for subsequent actions. But I wanted to ask you about what happened to equality. Specifically, it seems like a lot of these examples that you cite are ones in which people being equal in those moments is in itself kind of subversive sort of performance, and it seems that's something that people draw on later.
Rick Messick.
Oh, I appreciated your paper very much, and I was just going to suggest, as you think more about the issue of sequence of failures and felicity, there's a industry located about 3 blocks north of here that in a similar context thinks about the issue every day. It's the industry on K Street. It's called The Lobbyists, because when you're a legislative strategist, you constantly weigh up the question of, do I bring a matter to a vote if I don't have the majority, or the 60 in the Senate as it might be, on the theory that that failure will produce success later, or will I have locked in and lost? And you'll see in terms of, and there's of course a literature around this in political science, the conditions that you would call felicity that people think about when they think about the question of whether, gee, I've only got 40 votes today for a tax break for polluters or women's rights, or pick your issue, and should I keep pressing it hoping to get 45 votes next time, or if I bring it up, am I locked into a spiraling loss? And that might just give you some ideas for.
Okay, Junaid.
Many of the industry people are available for lunch, and they might even take your lunch.
Junaid.
Introduce this conference, I think you should have added something else. You're in an institution that takes your words quite literally, and we put billions of dollars behind your words. Arjuna, I hope you're right, because we've put between Africa and South Asia approximately $2 billion in investing in local government deliberation. So I think the question that I have is, when is it worth investing in a deliberative process, and when is it not worth investing in deliberative process? The investment in local government is very big right now in the World Bank, but we've invested a lot in what we call CDD movements. But CDD movements have come to the point where you go into a village and donors have established CDD for health, education, water in the same village with 3 different groups. We've
So we have time for one more question. I'm just going to ask Celestin to, for the, yeah, Celestin.
No, I just wanted to strongly endorse this question because I'm one of these traditional economists who believe that economic development doesn't happen without a very good, well-functioning state. And I often find myself in the minority in meetings in the bank because we go to some place and we realize that the government is not working. And the easy solution is to circumvent the government, to do a community legal development project, the city, to organize some kind of deliberative process and to circumvent all these corrupt politicians in the capital who are not doing their job. And so we go directly to the village, to the NGOs, and so on. But I don't think there is any example in history where any country has done well without a well-functioning government. So I would even go further than this and say that we are the government either need to fix it or to get out. There is no other way around. We cannot circumvent good, well-functioning state and just go around and organize a conversation and deliberative development with civil society organization and think that we've done our job. Thank you.
Unfortunately, there are many hands up. I'm afraid we are out of time for questions because I need to get Arjun to respond. And then we need to move on to coffee. So Arjun.
Should I go up?
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, that might.